What's good, y'all? Anderson Emerald here, back to talk about injuries in track and field and how athletes choose to or choose not to communicate about the injuries that they're dealing with. But before we dive in, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you're new here or if you've been here for a while, I truly do appreciate your support. Share the video, it does help me out. But let's dive in. So there was a press conference yesterday and also on Thursday for the Prefontaine Classic, which is going down later today on July 5th in Eugene, Oregon. And there was a few athletes who had noted they had injuries. One athlete unfortunately had to pull out, which is Kenny Bednarek, who we'll talk about in a second. But I want to start off with Sha'Carri Richardson, because in the press conference, and we'll take a look at the clip here, she actually said that she had been dealing with an injury back in February that kind of set her back for the year and caused her to not only open up a little bit later than we might have expected, but also only run one race up to this point until, again, later today in Prefontaine. So let's pull up the clip here and see what Sha'Carri said.
Sha'Carri, welcome back. Are we going to kickstart that season tomorrow, pre-classic, a little back-to-back win over the 100?
I would say I'm just ready to come out here, execute, and do what it is that I know me and my coach have been training to do with this season starting.
Okay. Of course, a little 11:47, one race under the belt. USA is coming up as well. What are you actually hoping for? Are you looking for a win or are you looking for a time tomorrow? If you had to pick one.
I am looking for a well-executed race. I definitely.
What does that involve, though, Sha'Carri?
So that definitely involves me having a healthy race. I was sustained an injury this year in February that completely set me back from the season, delaying my start of the season and just how I would normally execute. So if anything, my biggest thing is having a healthy race tomorrow. And with the healthy race, me being confident in me just knowing what I know I'm capable of doing, I know that I will produce what it is that I want.
So as you can see here, Sha'Carri does, open up the fact that she had an injury early in February and that set her back for 2025. Again, that did, people had saw or had some questions. I couldn't find it, but she posted on her Instagram stories at one point that she had her leg wrapped up. And I think the quote was like, crazy day at practice or something like that. So that kind of sparked some rumors. And then we did see her kind of around, supporting her teammates in different ways. And we saw her kind of with her leg wrapped up, which I'll show in a second. But this at least reveals that she did have an injury early in the year, and that did set her back. Now, at the Tokyo Golden Grand Prix earlier this year, which was her first race where she ran 11.47 seconds, she actually did show up to run, but she did have a wrap on her leg. So here's the clip of, showing that wrap on her leg.
From the American, who's got strapping on the back of her leg. Now, this is something that we've been noticing in the last couple of weeks, perhaps an issue.
So you can see Sha'Carri with the strapping on her leg. Now, one thing that's really important here is it's sometimes challenging to say, okay, this means that an athlete is injured, right? An athlete having a strap like this around their leg doesn't necessarily mean that they're injured. It may just mean something else, right? I think back to Allison Felix, who back in 2012, she actually started wearing kind of like strapping or like compressions around her legs, specifically because she had really severe shin splints. Wasn't injury or anything like that, but started in 2012 where she was always running with the again, the compressions around her legs to at least subdue the shin splints that she deals with. So that's why it's sometimes hard to gauge what an athlete is actually dealing with. But in this case, Sha'Carri, at least again, she revealed that she was dealing with an injury. But that's something that us as the public had no idea about. And that is where my kind of like discussion comes into play, where athletes in track and field, unfortunately, don't frequently communicate when they have injuries. They may or may not do so. They may say that, I just had some setbacks in training, or, I'm just starting my season late, but maybe will never say that they actually have an injury and then continue on with their year. The other part here is that Kenny Bednarek, he actually pulled out of Prefontaine, and he dropped this yesterday, so on Friday, late on Friday, and he said explicitly, and this is on his YouTube channel, just a post, he said, quote, "I've decided to withdraw from tomorrow's race, dealing with some tightness today. And after talking it through with my team, we agreed it was best not to take any risks. These decisions are never easy. I was really looking forward to competing this weekend, but with nationals less than a month away, staying healthy is the priority." So we had seen Kenny Bednarek healthy throughout the entire season. He's been literally tearing it up in the season, both in the 100 and the 200. So now we were looking forward to seeing him run the 200 here in Prefontaine against the likes of Dream Richards, Alex Ogando, who else was in the field? Letsile Toboho, right? It was a pretty stacked field, and many thought he could run fast. But he here on the flip side, is being very transparent and open about the fact that he picked up an injury, or at least felt some tightness, and he's going to step out of the race to prepare for trials, which is in 3 weeks. The reality of the sport is trials and world championships, that's the most important thing. One-off races are not going to be as important when it comes to, the overall season for an athlete. So this is an example of some transparency from an athlete that we generally don't get, for the most part. Sometimes. One other example as well is Let's Boho, where earlier in the year, he was competing frequently, but at the Rabat Diamond League, where he competed, or he signed up to run in the 100 and the 200, ran the 100, pulled out of the 200, but right after, he posted on Instagram and said, quote, "Today's performance wasn't what I had hoped for. I'm currently dealing with a recurring injury, which hasn't been easy. However, I'm channeling this disappointment and pain into resolve. I'm already focused on recovery and growth, and I know I will come back a stronger man. See ya soon." So, of course, he took some time off and is now back on the track competing in Prefontaine later today. So these are two examples of athletes being a little more transparent about, the injuries that they're dealing with. Another example is Noah Lyles, who pulled out of the Adidas Atlantic City Games and, shortly after, I guess the day of, showed up at the meet and revealed that he had a foot injury. But when he pulled out of the meet, it wasn't actually communicated at that moment. And then I think he had announced it at the wall on the track, on the NBC broadcast. So those things are kind of, tricky when talking about injuries. That's just another example. But on the flip side, you have Sha'Carri, who generally does not speak with the media, so it's not like we would have heard anything, in the time frame. And she has a wild card to the World Championship, so not expecting to actually hear something from her necessarily. But we now actually know that she had an injury, and questions on how that might affect, her season, where she's at right now, et cetera, et cetera. And again, this goes to my larger point of the issue we have in track and field about athletes actually communicating the injuries that they deal with. A lot of times, it's almost like the norm for athletes to just not say anything and maybe just like let it go, and maybe no one will ask, and we'll never hear anything about it, and then they get back on the track later in the year, or maybe even the following year or something like that. And compared to other sports, whether it's the NBA, the NFL, or even, boxing, MMA, like in those other sports, we do hear about injuries much more frequently. Like it's a very clear, process for athletes to communicate about the injuries that they have. And things are different, specifically when we're talking about the NBA or the NFL, right? Those are different sports in the sense that those are team sports. So there's different structures as it relates to that. But I do hear the conversation around track and field. Athletes should be communicating about their injuries more if we want to be a professional sport, or if we want to get to a point where these athletes are truly treated like professionals. And I'm going to be completely honest, I'm a little split on this, right? I actually understand where athletes come from with not communicating their injuries, because that's the nature of the sport now, right? I want to know what they're dealing with, so then I can maybe adjust how I'm communicating about them, adjust how, myself, I'm reporting on them, adjust how I might ask questions the next time I get to see them. But I also understand the landscape and the environment of the sport that we live in has catered to, athletes not having to communicate about their injuries. I will be completely honest. There's many athletes that I've spoken to, even as of now, that either are dealing with injuries or have dealt with injuries, but haven't publicly said it because they want to, respect their privacy. They don't want to, show their hand in different capacities. Like, these things actually do happen. And again, I think that's the environment of the sport that we currently exist in that has allowed athletes the opportunity to just like keep things on the low and not actually speak about their injuries. But on the flip side, you do have certain athletes, again, like a Kenny B, Let's Boho, even shout out Jakob Ingebrigtsen, where they are very clear about the injuries they're dealing with and how they're going to have to take time off and when they might, return to the track, to race once again for the season. It's very tricky. And again, I don't have any actual answers. Again, I would love for athletes to be very clear about the injuries they're dealing with and the setbacks that they're dealing with, because I think for fans, for media, for viewers, like, it makes things a trillion times easier, whether it's just to know that they won't be competing, or even if you are competing in a race, set expectations that you're not going to be running as fast because you've been dealing with something. Those things are very helpful. But on the flip side, I also understand the landscape of the sport that we're in right now, and how, like it or not, track and field is not like other professional sports, and it is conducive to athletes simply not sharing certain pieces of information and us as fans and media simply dealing with it. Again, not saying I like it. I don't agree with it. I would love, it helps me. I actually go out and, speak with these athletes, and it's extremely helpful if I'm able to know things before I go speak with them. But it's the nature of our sport, and I understand that problem, which, in general is an actual problem. Now, I don't know, our sport is not going to be professional anytime soon, but just one thing that I did find interesting as we lead into Prefontaine, kind of two contrasts where Kenny B was very clear about the injury he's dealing with as to why he's pulling out of the meet later today. But then also Sha'Carri, who had an injury early in the season, didn't communicate it, but now the most high-profile race of her season so far, she's actually communicating it. Can understand both sides as to why an athlete may choose, to go, whichever route they do in terms of that communication. But let me know what you think about athletes and their injuries and their communication around injuries. Do you think it should be mandatory in some capacity for athletes to speak about the injuries they're dealing with? Or do you think, it should be at the discretion of the athlete, the agent, the coach, or whatever, and we should live in a limbo situation? Obviously, I think y'all would want to communicate about injuries, but, there's two sides to these different situations. But let me know what you think about these injuries. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Always truly appreciate y'all. Thanks for watching.